France's yellow vests have held yet another protest now for the 22nd consecutive week. That's despite repressive new laws and bans. Polls say the government's so-called national debate has been received quite poorly, and they were forced to accept a referendum on Macron's attempt to denationalize the airports of Paris. And now joining us for this news review is Rodney Shakespeare, commentator and professor of economics, joining us out of London, and Tony Gosling, investigative journalist, joining us out of Bristol. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. Now, Professor Shakespeare, I'm going to start with you first, sir. I mean, the grievances, these it's 22 weeks now, the grievances these people have, I mean, they're pretty much valid on any, country in the planet, if you really look at it in that perspective. I mean, but do they think that ultimately they will see some kind of change, or are they asking for too much?
Yes, you put your finger on it, sir. You said any country on the planet. There is a very widespread phenomenon going on. And in simple terms, it is that at a time when there's vast capacity to create wealth, the ordinary people are not getting their fair share of it. In France, for example, middle-class incomes have been static or going backwards for 10 years. In the United States, middle-class incomes have been going backwards for 25 years. Now, that phenomenon is not understood. And if you look at France at the moment, the objection to the denationalization of the airports is that it will be privatized into the hands of a small capital-owning group. And those groups are hogging up more and more wealth. And whatever Macron does, he's only going to make the situation worse until they understand that people only have insecure jobs. The jobs relatively to capital are earning less and less. And somehow you've got to open up access to the capital instruments to the mass of the population, because you aren't going to solve it. And nothing that Macron says about his town hall meetings is going to change the situation at all. This is very fundamental. They have no solution to it in France or in the other countries elsewhere.
And now, Tony, if I could swing over to you now. Now, we know that there's been this national debate Macron's tried to have with citizens. He's cruised around and he's tried, and we know the citizens, they want lower taxes, they want better public spending, better public services, they want more spending power as citizens. Now, and Macron is going to, in a couple of days, shortly here, he's supposed to release the conclusions of those debates, and if he has any answers to, possible concessions or answers out of this mess, where do you think we stand?
Well, the French population, the people have already had this debate, and they've come out with a brilliant manifesto, which I think in many ways, right across the Western world, and the French have to have a pat on the back for doing this, has presented us all with what is effectively a united front against the oligarchy. I mean, Rodney there is talking about the privatisation of the airports in Paris, for example. What a brilliant example for them to pick on this weekend, because it shows you that the capitalist classes that used to be known in the mixed economies around Europe were basically there to innovate and to open up new industries, to invest in research and development, and to start up new technologies, that sort of thing. But owning an airport doesn't do that. Owning an airport is a virtual monopoly, or a duopoly, if maybe there's two airports and two different companies own them in Paris. So really this is not innovation by the capitalists, this is just racketeering. So what they're doing is they're sitting on an existing infrastructure asset and they're just taking money every time people use it. And of course, the whole population virtually of Paris at some point need to use an airport. So it's racketeering. The government should be running these, and they should be running them effectively at near cost, so that there's no profiteering and racketeering going on. And so that's why the people of France, we don't need Macron's infantile debate to be had. The debate has already been had in France, and the French people are absolutely clear which side of the line they're on. They're saying you're not going to sell this off to your friends, to your bankster friends, or investment companies, because we know what you're going to do. You're just going to profiteer off it. You're going to have people investing as shareholders who will make loads of money, and then, for example, they will be able to use these facilities. I mean, what we see, of course, when things like electricity, gas, water, these sorts of things are privatised, is the people invest a little bit of money in this, which to them is small change, and that means they never have to pay a gas bill, an electricity bill, a water bill again, because that investment has a return on it each year, which pays those bills for them. So really, this is just free water, gas, electricity, and air travel for the super rich and the ordinary rich, where everybody else has to pay. So effectively, what the French have nailed here is an enormous regressive tax, which is going on right across the Western world, particularly across Europe. And of course, this is also facilitated by Brussels. And we've seen what's happened here in the UK, and the French have had a taste of this as well, with the Lisbon Treaty vote, as to what happens when you vote against what Brussels wants to do. And that is that you basically just get thrown back in your face and told in no uncertain terms, you don't have a democracy, I'm afraid you're going to do what you're told. So it's not surprising to see the French out on the streets. I think there will be some little bean counter in Macron's office who will be watching very closely the number of people turning out on the streets this spring. And it's interesting to see just over the last week, we've seen a 1/3 increase in the number of people on the streets from the 21st week last Saturday to the 22nd week this Saturday, today. And that shows that what's happening here is a really good tactic by the Gilets Jaunes, which is to start the protest at the beginning of the winter and allow it to really pick up in the spring, which it's obviously now doing. As the weather gets better, the Parisians, the French citizens from all over the country are starting now to come out on the streets more and more. And I think this protest is definitely not going to go away, because the French citizens, bless them, are showing the way for the rest of Europe.
And Professor Shakespeare, you hear a lot of the business elite. They say it's either capitalism or on the other side of the spectrum. What a lot of these people want, their handouts. It's a communist government or a socialist economic structure. Is there a middle ground? Is there some kind of redistribution of wealth where it doesn't fall under those categories, but it's free and fair and still falls under the capital structure?
I don't think so, not now. No. Because of all the assumptions are wrong. Could I comment on Tony Gosling?
Of course.
He got it so right. He pointed to the fact that the monopolies and airports, water, gas, electricity, sewage are being sold off to the tiny elite, who then benefit and take the incomes for evermore. And at the same time, the money system, which finances the capital works, the physical structure, that is in fact coming from a banking system rather than from the national bank at interest-free and repayable. And as a result, the benefits are going to that tiny elite. Tony has put his finger on it. And there is no solution to it now, because the system is based at the moment that jobs will always be sufficient and secure. No, no, no. They're no longer sufficient. They're no longer secure for the mass of people. You're going to have to do things differently. And that's the problem. And that is why in France, there's going to be no new thinking coming out from Macron in 10 days' time, or whenever he produces his alleged response to these town hall debates. They do not have an answer to it. The middle classes are going backwards, and the poor are increasingly insecure, and they never had a fair deal in the first place.
And Tony, we have about 2 minutes left. Your closing thoughts, please.
I think we have to look at who is actually running France, because clearly we've had a similar situation in France with Marine Le Pen and Emmanuel Macron. It's a choice that the French people didn't want to make between two people, neither of which they really wanted to run their country. We saw that, of course, with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. The same sort of thing is happening right across the Western world, where you're left with the lesser of two evils, and that isn't actually democracy. Instead, what we're getting is Goldman Sachs bankers running the finance ministries around Europe. We have that absolutely clearly in Italy. Italy is not allowed to choose its own finance minister in order to get loans. That's what they have to do. And so what we've got is governments who are actually set against their own people. You have the government fighting the population. So their efforts are not spent managing and running the country. They are spent managing and running the people and trying to control the people.
Okay,
the politicians as well have massive finance of the political parties as well, through these massive donations of millions of pounds. So the parties are controlled, and the politicians have nothing to say, nothing worthwhile to say at all.
Gentlemen,
so that is what passes for democracy now.
Time has gotten the better, so I want to thank you both for joining us on the program. Rodney Shakespeare out of London and Tony Gosling out of Bristol. And viewers, that's a wrap for the segment of your Press TV's News Review. Thank you for joining us, and bye-bye for now.